Ontario has officially dropped the gloves against the federal government's plan for a national price on carbon. Today, the province's new PC government announced it's launching a court challenge, arguing it is unethical and unconstitutional to impose a tax on a province. Saskatchewan has already launched a similar challenge. All of this comes months before the price of $20 per tonne takes effect on emissions in any province without an adequate carbon plan of its own, according to the federal government. Ontario used to have such a plan until Doug Ford became premier and scrapped the cap-and-trade program. So what makes the province of Ontario think it can win this case, and what will it do instead to cut emissions? Joining me now from Queen's Park in Toronto is Ontario's Environment Minister, Rod Phillips. So Saskatchewan already has a court reference in place. You're intervening in that. The province of Ontario is. Why launch a separate one?
You know, Catherine, we obviously support the Saskatchewan reference, but we saw that there was another opportunity to make our own reference, and my colleague, the Attorney General Caroline Mulroney, registered that reference today. So we ran with a commitment to Ontario voters that we would do everything in our power to stop the federal government from imposing a carbon tax. We've taken the steps here in Ontario. I introduced legislation this week to get rid of the cap-and-trade program here, and so we will, as I said, take every opportunity can, use the courts and other means to stop the carbon tax.
Now, you would not be, obviously Saskatchewan is doing this. Manitoba looked at doing it as well, and Manitoba's Premier, Brian Pallister, said if we go to court, we lose. On top of that, we've heard from many constitutional experts who generally seem very skeptical about the possibility of this succeeding. I want to play one of those experts for you. Earlier today, we spoke with Eric Adams. He teaches constitutional law at the University of Alberta. Here he is.
What began as political opposition to the policy of a carbon tax has now been saddled with a constitutional argument. And I think that the argument works better in politics and as a policy dispute than it does in a constitutional court of law. We'll see where that goes, but just disagreeing with the policy of a carbon tax does not allow you to construct a constitutional argument out of thin air.
Manitoba says you're going to lose. Lots of constitutional experts say you're going to lose. What do you know that we don't? What makes you think you can win this court case?
Well, you know, I'm not the lawyer. I leave that to the Attorney General. But we're confident that we can win this. And
Why,
as your guest mentioned, there is, of course, the policy perspective as well. Well, because as you would expect, we looked at this. We looked at the viability of it. We supported what Saskatchewan was doing. We see that they have arguments that we think can be effective. And then you'll see the case that we've registered and that'll be argued. We believe we have arguments that are effective about the constitutionality of this.
Different arguments
than Saskatchewan? Your other guest also mentioned the policy aspect of it. Yeah, we wouldn't be registering the exact same arguments. So yes, there are obviously different approaches you take to this from a constitutional perspective. But at the foundation of it, we just think that this tax doesn't make sense in terms of the impact on jobs. And we did see already yesterday the federal government starting to climb down from this position, hearing from business that they can't be competitive with a carbon tax. So we will make our legal arguments in court. The courts will decide. We can't predispose that, but we're confident. But we also think that there's good policy arguments for why this isn't the time with the economic turmoil, with the trading relationship situation we have. This is not the time for a job-killing carbon tax.
I wonder, though, do you have legal advice that actually says that you will win? Because it's one thing to object on a policy level, but you actually need, obviously, legal grounds that says that the federal government doesn't have the authority to do this. Have lawyers told you that you will be successful?
Clearly, we believe we have a case that can win.
But you have that advice from lawyers.
I can't predetermine what the courts are going to say. Yeah, we believe and we are confident that this is a case that can win. It'll be a great day in Ontario when we do. So
that's not the same thing as a legal opinion, though, sir,
we registered the case. Well, we wouldn't be entering into this if we didn't think we had the best opportunity to win that we could. We support the Saskatchewan arguments and think that they're also strong. That's why we're supporting them. But we think that our arguments are as well. But just getting back to the reason it's so important. I mean, in the first instance, of course, we appreciate that climate change is an issue. We just see this not as the solution. So we think it's bad from an economic point of view. We also think, and again, your guest mentioned the policy components, the level of carbon tax that will be required will be 5, 6, 7 times what it is. We don't believe that this government, even the Trudeau government, sincerely is going to introduce a $150 a ton carbon tax that economists would say they'd have to. So that leaves Ontarians and leaves us thinking this is just a cash grab. We can't support that.
You mentioned the Trudeau government, and Minister McKenna was commenting on this today. She says it's clear that it's the federal government's jurisdiction to set a price on carbon, and I want you to listen to something else she had to say.
I was extraordinarily disappointed to see today the government of Ford make absolutely clear that, like the government, like the former government of Stephen Harper, like the federal Conservatives, they have no climate plan. That they announced today that they are going to spend $30 million, waste $30 million of taxpayer money fighting climate action. It's extraordinarily disappointing.
She went on to say that money could be better spent working with schools, hospitals, and cities, or to move forward on climate change. Your government is very focused on trying to save money. So again, with another legal case underway in Saskatchewan, why spend up to $30 million on an additional legal case?
So the Attorney General mentioned today that she's confident it will be quite a bit less than that. We're going to be able to take advantage of constitutional lawyers that are internal to the government. And just to the point you raised about jurisdiction, because that's an important one. As Canadians know, there are some areas of jurisdiction that are very clear, education, healthcare, that rest with the provinces, that are federally when it comes to immigration. This environment as an area is an area of split jurisdiction. It's an area where we share jurisdiction. What I said to Minister McKenna when I met with her is, why can't we work together? Why do they have to be so dogmatic and so focused on having to have a carbon tax to affect this issue? We've been saying, there's no reason that there can only be one solution, except that they're saying that there's only one solution, which is a tax. So from our perspective, we're obviously hopeful. As we said today, hopefully the Prime Minister is listening to this. Hopefully, as I said today in my legislature here, it's never too late to do the right thing, and canceling the carbon tax would let us work together on this issue and on creating jobs together. So hopefully we'll get through that, but in the meantime, as long as they're going to impose that carbon tax, we're going to fight it, and one of the means that we're going to fight it is with this court reference.
Let's talk about alternative solutions, which you just mentioned there from your conversation with Catherine McKenna. You yourself said today that you'll unveil a plan that will, quote, have real impact on our environment and preserve it for future generations. So we haven't seen that plan yet. You're going to unveil it, but here's what I want to know. Are you committed to meeting the Paris Accord targets, rather?
The Paris Accord targets, which were originally the Stephen Harper government targets, that is interesting why you hear the minister talk about those targets disparagingly. The Harper targets are the Trudeau targets, and those are the Paris targets.
So what are the targets that you
put into the legislation? Obviously, since the first. So what we put into the legislation that is in the legislature right now, obviously still has to pass, but should it pass, is the requirement for a plan and for targets. We'll set out those targets when we set out our plan, and obviously to be clear and so that Ontarians can see where we're going, we'll also report on those targets regularly. So as you know, we've been in government now for just a little bit over 5 weeks. Our initial commitment to get to work on this was to get rid of the cap and trade carbon tax. We're doing that. A plan will follow. It'll be a plan that Ontarians can see what the targets are, and that we'll report back on a regular basis. Which targets, again, whether the former wind targets were based on a different date, the Paris targets were based on a different date. We'll be clear about that when we bring our plan forward.
But the Harper targets, the Stephen Harper targets, the Justin Trudeau targets, those are the targets that you hope to meet, just by a different means?
As I said, we'll bring the targets forward when we bring the plan forward. That only makes sense, because the obvious question will be, how will you meet those targets, and that'll be contained in the plan.
But my question is your objective to try to meet those targets? You have to set the targets first and then figure out how to get there, no?
Yeah. Well, you have to have a plan. I mean, we don't believe in targets just for the sake of targets. And part of the disappointment that I certainly got feedback on when I was campaigning in my home riding of Ajax was the fact that targets keep getting set and not met. So we will have targets. As I said, that's part of our legislation, but those targets will be attached to the plan, and when we bring that plan forward, we'll talk about the targets in more detail. We
will look very much forward to hearing about that and having you back on the program to talk about it. Thank you for your time today. Rod Phillips.
Thank you, Catherine. We'll look forward to it.